In some Quranic verses, God says, those people did such and such, so we became angry. Or in some other verses, God says, we become happy with such and such. In interpreting the Quran, one of the challenges is how to approach and how to make sense of these anthropomorphic verses. Does God get happy? Does he get angry? Aren't these human traits? There are different interpretations of such anthropomorphic verses, depending on the schools of thought, depending on the approach, like whether these interpretations are philosophical, theological, mystical. There are some who philosophically approach the matter trying to save God from anthropomorphism, saying that the qualities related to God are not in the same line with those of the human beings. So although we are using the word God is happy, humans are happy, we are not talking about same emotional thing. But there is this very elegant interpretation from the Shi Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, in some of those verses where God says we are angry at such and such, or we become happy with such and such, he says there is this hidden elegance and intricacy in these verses. There is this technical term in Islamic mysticism, wali or awliya, its plural form, that is friend or friends, which refers to those individuals who gain proximity to God to a remarkable degree, who can exhibit divine traits, who can embody divine traits. According to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, Awliya, some of them, gain so much proximity that they stand between the created and the creator. They are friends of God so intimately that God refers to their actions as his own actions. God refers to their sentiments as our sentiment. Hence the pronoun we in these verses, instead of saying I became angry. These saints have become so intimate with God that their happiness is God's happiness. Their wrath is God's wrath. So when people did such and such, it was one or several of those awliya that became angry with them. And God says we became angry with them. This is a very fine interpretation, and it helps us make better sense of many of such verses. So this is the hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Indeed, Allah exalted and glorified is He. Indeed, Allah does not feel sorrow for anyone, but He created close friends, that is, awliya, for Himself who do feel sorrow. So He made their contentment His own contentment, and their anger His own anger. This is because He made them callers unto Him and guides on His path. Thus they became as if they were Him. But this does not mean that they are actually Him. Rather, it means that Allah is the one who reaches His creation through them. God has said, that is in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 80, whosoever obeys the messenger obeys God. And He has also said regarding those who gave allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu. Again, He means in the Quran. This is verse 10 of chapter 48 of the Quran. Truly those who pledge allegiance unto thee, that is unto the Prophet, pledge allegiance only unto God. So the hadith continues, all this and other such expressions of approval and anger are said in reference to them, that is in reference to the awliya, meaning that when God says we become happy, we become angry, it is the awliya that the Quran is referring to, who are God's vicegerents. There is also a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that reads, indeed the spirit of the believer is more strongly connected to the spirit of God than the sunbeam is to the sun. Now, what are the implications of these hadiths? The first one, the spiritual implication relates to the awliya as reflections of divine will. The passage teaches that the awliya are closely aligned with the divine, and this, like the concept of awliya, resonates in both Sunnism, Sunni Sufism, and Shiism. The hadith we examined teaches us that the friends of God, the Awliya, are so closely aligned with the divine that their pleasure is God's pleasure and their anger is God's anger. Obeying them is considered equivalent to obeying God, which implies that God interacts with creation through his Awliya and through his guides, and it has Quranic roots. This is not just Hadith to be dismissed. There is a second ethical implication that relates to embodying divine traits. Building on the Quran, the Hadith suggests that the Awliya's pleasure is God's pleasure and their anger is his anger. The text implies that those closest to God embody his will and act as vessels of divine justice and mercy. We are encouraged to strive to become vessels of divine attributes as well, to embody compassion, justice, and forgiveness. Importantly, this text shows us, teaches us that ethical actions are not isolated behaviors. They are connected to a cosmic moral order. Our conduct toward God's friends and vice versa become a measure of our faith. There is a third communal and social implication which regards recognizing sacred authority. The passage links allegiance to divine authority. As we saw, it cites the Quranic verse chapter 48, verse 10, truly those who pledge allegiance unto thee, the Prophet, pledge allegiance only unto God. This suggests a theological foundation for recognizing legitimate religious leadership as not just administrative, but sacred. In our societies today, it pushes us to reflect deeply on whom we follow and why. It warns against blind obedience to authority, but also stresses that when true divine representatives exist, supporting them is a divine duty. Thus, community becomes a spiritually connected organism, not just a social structure. Some broader reflections on this discussion are as follows. This text reshapes our concept of God's presence in the world. Building on the Quran, it teaches us that God acts through people. God teaches through relationships. God calls us to ethical and spiritual awareness through those closest to Him. This discussion has very interesting implications in our practical lives. It helps and teaches us to be cautious against dismissing others' spiritual experiences. It helps us to seek out those who radiate the signs of God's presence, those whose humility, wisdom, and justice reflect something beyond them. It also invites us to see the divine in our interactions and uphold reverence for those who truly are aligned with God. Whether you are in Sunnism or in Shiism, the concept of wilaya is fundamental, important, and it helps us in our practical lives, in our life even today. And it helps us enormously by bringing God into our everyday interactions in the contemporary time. Thank you for watching.